When I started to make so-called pop films, it was in fact as an invitation by Andrew Oldham to make the film Charlie Is My Darling. After making that, he asked me to do a number of promotional films, and I went on then to do them for Top of the Pops. Andrew Oldham, manager of the Rolling Stones, I think was probably one of the first to see that if I could make a little film for Top of the Pops, then that little film could be sent around the world. I had met Syd Barrett on many occasions long before he formed Pink Floyd and went up to London. We were both at the time living in Cambridge. I was a postgraduate student who'd taken up painting. He was a painter who painted. I left Cambridge and went up to the Slade where I started to make films. And it was about 2 years later when had launched into this film called Tonight Let's All Make Love in London when I went along to see them at UFO. Of course, remembering that it was Sid and his pals who used to rehearse outside my door and keep me awake at night. Went along a couple of times. In fact, I then got friendly with a girl called Jenny Spears, who was pretty close to Sid at the time too, and she, I think it was more than anybody, saw some of my film and said, wouldn't Sid's music be ideal for it? And I agreed entirely, and went back to see Sid and said, listen, you guys, I'm making this film. I like your music. I've done some filming at UFO. And why don't I take you into a studio and record? I'd like to record Interstellar Overdrive and maybe something else. I'll book a studio for 3 hours and you can come in and I'll record some music and I'll use it for my film. While they were recording it, I filmed it. This was obviously assuming I might use a little bit in my film. They then did another track, which was an improvisation, which they then decided to call Nick's Boogie. And I came out with a load of tapes and signed a contract to use the material in my film. They were delighted to get the promotion. Ended up using the music I wanted over a lot of images that I'd shot at UFO. And I used it again at the end of the film over the sequences I'd shot later, I don't know, a year later probably, at the 14-hour Technicolor Dream. I thought the music was absolutely perfect because my film was not intended to be a pop film, even though I called it Pop Concerto for Film eventually. I wasn't interested in the sort of light-hearted side of pop music. I was much more interested in the darker shadow side that the Stones represented, obviously, in comparison, for example, to the Beatles, and which for me, Pink Floyd were perfect. They had this sort of discontinuous free-flowing jazz kind of style, mixed with quite a lot of sort of classical feeling, and most of all, that sense of dislocation of consciousness, the sort of druggy thing that was at that time obviously not just a fashion, but the beginning of the whole counterculture.